You did not arrive here by accident. That idea is too small to explain what is happening. What brought you to this moment is not chance, not curiosity, not an algorithm, but resonance. Something in you matched something in this message before your mind ever got involved. Long before you pressed play, a frequency inside you was already listening. This is how recognition works. It moves first. Thought follows later. When people hear the phrase, chosen one, the mind wants to turn it into hierarchy, destiny, or ego. That distortion has nothing to do with what is being pointed to here. Chosen does not mean special in a social sense. It does not mean superior, favored, or elevated above others. It means tuned. It means ready. It means your internal state has reached a level of coherence where certain information can finally land without resistance. Frequency decides access, not worth. Reality does not deliver experiences randomly. It mirrors inner readiness. When your identity reaches a certain stability, specific signals become visible, audible, unavoidable. Before that point, the same information could pass directly through your field without registering. This is why two people can hear the same words and only one feels something activate. Nothing external changed. The listener did. Watching this is not passive. It is participation. Attention is not neutral. Where you place it is where you place your creative power. Consciousness does not observe reality from the outside, it selects reality by resonance. The moment you feel that subtle pull, that quiet sense of, this is speaking to me, something has already shifted. Recognition is the beginning of embodiment. Effort comes later, if it comes at all. You may have noticed this pattern before. Certain books, conversations, or moments appear exactly when something inside you is ready to collapse or reorganize. Not earlier. Not later. Right on time. This is not because life is orchestrating events for you. It is because you are no longer broadcasting the same signal you once were. As your frequency changes, the field responds with new reflections. This is also why forcing never works. You cannot muscle your way into resonance. You cannot think your way into readiness. Identity shifts first. Emotion stabilizes. Resistance softens. Then recognition happens naturally. The signal arrives because the noise has quieted enough for you to hear it. If you feel a calm certainty rather than excitement, a stillness rather than adrenaline, that is important. Expansion often feels quiet. Alignment does not shout. It settles. The part of you that recognizes truth does not need convincing. It simply remembers. You are not here to be impressed, entertained, or saved. You are here because something in you is already aligned with what is being transmitted. That alignment is the only requirement. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be proven. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and remain within it. Omega level is not a peak experience. It is not a moment of clarity, a breakthrough, or a high you touch and then fall back from. Omega is coherence that has stabilized. It is the point where your inner state and the reality you live in stop arguing with each other. Not because life becomes easy, but because resistance has collapsed. What you are being matches what you experience closely enough that force is no longer required. This is why Omega is irreversible. Not because nothing challenging ever happens again, but because your identity no longer fractures under pressure. You do not oscillate wildly between insight and confusion, faith and doubt, alignment and collapse. The system has settled. Your nervous system, emotions, perceptions, and actions now operate from the same center. This is coherence. And coherence, once embodied, does not revert without conscious self-betrayal. Many misunderstand this and mistake Omega for enlightenment. Enlightenment is often treated as a concept, a label, or an aesthetic. It becomes something to claim, display, or defend. Omega has no interest in labels. The moment identity attaches to being enlightened, coherence is lost. Omega is quiet because it does not need to be announced. It is felt in the absence of friction, not in declarations. It is also not positivity. Omega does not mean you feel good all the time, think positive thoughts, or bypass discomfort. In fact, forced positivity is a sign of instability. It signals resistance to what is present. Omega can sit calmly inside grief, anger, or uncertainty without needing to fix them. Emotion moves, but it does not hijack identity. This is not numbness. It is mastery through allowance. Omega is not superiority. There is no hierarchy in coherence. Frequency is not a moral achievement. It is not earned through virtue, knowledge, or effort. Two people can live very different lives and carry very different roles, yet both be fully coherent. Omega does not elevate you above others. It roots you more deeply into yourself. Comparison disappears because identity no longer depends on position. It is also not spiritual status. Omega cannot be collected through practices, rituals, or techniques. Those may refine awareness temporarily, but Omega is not something you do. It is something you become. Techniques operate at the level of behavior. Omega operates at the level of identity. When identity shifts, behavior follows automatically. When behavior is forced without identity change, coherence never locks in. This is why performance collapses at this level. You stop trying to look aligned. You stop trying to sound wise. You stop managing how you are perceived. Performance requires split attention. One part of you acts, another monitors. Omega has no split. There is only presence expressing itself naturally. Embodiment is the key distinction. Knowledge can be borrowed. Language can be copied. Identity cannot be faked. Reality responds to what you are, not what you know. When Omega stabilizes, the external world begins reflecting your inner state with precision, not because you are controlling it, but because there is no longer internal contradiction to project confusion outward. Omega is simply this: when who you are, what you feel, and how you live stop being separate conversations. When effort dissolves because alignment has taken over. When nothing needs to be proven because nothing is missing. Being chosen has been misunderstood for a very long time, and that misunderstanding has created two distortions that block real alignment. One is ego, the belief that being chosen means being better. The other is victimhood, the belief that being chosen means being burdened or punished. Both come from the same error, assuming selection is personal. It is not. Selection is mechanical. It is resonance. Reality does not choose based on morality, effort, or intention. It responds to frequency. Just as a radio signal cannot be received by a device that is not tuned to it, certain experiences, insights, and responsibilities cannot land in a system that is not calibrated to hold them. When people speak of being chosen, what they are actually pointing to is readiness. Internal coherence reaches a threshold, and new levels of reality become accessible. No favoritism is involved. This is why contrast plays such a central role. Difficulty, pressure, and friction are not punishments. They are refining mechanisms. When identity is unstable, contrast feels cruel. When identity is stabilizing, contrast becomes informative. It exposes where coherence is leaking. It compresses awareness. It strips away excess. Over time, this process produces density, not heaviness, but gravity. A presence that does not scatter under pressure. Many Omega-level individuals report a lifelong sense of not fully belonging. This is often interpreted as rejection or flaw. In reality, it is calibration. When your frequency does not match the dominant tone of an environment, you feel it immediately. You cannot fully settle. This discomfort is not meant to exile you. It is meant to prevent premature attachment. Non-belonging keeps identity fluid long enough to refine. Pressure works the same way. Repeated challenges that seem disproportionate are not signs of cosmic cruelty. They are indicators that your system can handle compression without collapsing. Frequency is strengthened under load, not comfort. This is not about suffering for its own sake. It is about refinement through contrast. Fire does not create gold, it reveals it by burning away what is not. This is also why comparison dissolves at higher coherence. When you understand frequency, envy and superiority lose relevance. No one else's path could produce your calibration, and your path could not produce theirs. What looks like delay from the outside is often incubation. What looks like struggle is often precision work being done beneath the surface. Being chosen does not mean you are destined for greatness in a visible sense. It means you are being tuned for clarity. It means your system is being conditioned to hold responsibility without distortion. Responsibility for presence, for impact, for the way your state affects the field around you. Favor implies preference. Frequency implies law. One is emotional. The other is structural. When you see this clearly, ego relaxes and victimhood dissolves. You stop asking why life is harder for you and start noticing how it is shaping you. Not into someone better, but into someone coherent. And coherence is what reality responds to, every time. The first real shift rarely announces itself. There is no external confirmation, no visible upgrade, no moment where life suddenly looks different. Instead, something internal goes quiet. The hunger to be validated begins to fade. Not because you have been fulfilled by praise, but because you no longer organize yourself around being seen, approved of, or understood. This collapse happens across every layer. Social validation loses its grip first. You stop needing to explain yourself, justify your choices, or correct how others perceive you. Misunderstanding no longer feels dangerous. Silence becomes preferable to self-translation. You realize that being accurately perceived by everyone was never possible, and more importantly, never necessary. Then spiritual validation dissolves, which is subtler and often more confronting. The desire to be recognized as awakened, conscious, healed, or advanced starts to feel hollow. You notice how easily spiritual language can become another costume, another way to secure worth. When this falls away, something stabilizes. You stop performing insight. You stop collecting concepts to prove depth. Truth no longer needs witnesses to exist. This is where silence replaces performance. Not an avoidant silence, not withdrawal, but a grounded quiet. You speak when something needs to move, not when something needs to be reinforced. You listen more than you correct. You allow others to misunderstand without rushing to clarify. This is not indifference. It is trust. Trust that what is real does not require constant reinforcement. When validation dies, defensiveness dies with it. You stop arguing to win, explaining to be accepted, or reacting to protect an image. Triggers still arise, but they pass through more quickly because there is no identity wrapped around them. Without a self to defend, friction loses its fuel. This is one of the clearest early signs of coherence beginning to lock in. What replaces validation seeking is a different orientation entirely. You begin to feel guided from within rather than managed from without. Decisions are made because they feel aligned, not because they will be applauded. Discomfort becomes tolerable when it is truthful. Comfort becomes irrelevant when it is hollow. You choose resonance over reassurance. This shift often feels like a loss before it feels like a gain. Relationships may thin out. Conversations change. You may speak less and be quieter in rooms where you once tried to shine. This is not regression. It is consolidation. Energy that was previously leaking outward in search of confirmation is now returning to center. Truth no longer needs defense because it is no longer an idea you hold. It is a state you inhabit. When truth is embodied, disagreement does not threaten it. Doubt does not weaken it. Criticism does not fracture it. You stop trying to convince because there is nothing to convince anyone of. Your alignment is sufficient. This is why this shift comes before external change. Reality cannot reorganize around an identity that is still asking for permission to exist. Validation must die so sovereignty can take its place. Not dominance. Not isolation. Sovereignty. The quiet authority of someone who knows who they are without needing to announce it. When this happens, you may not feel more powerful. You may feel simpler. Less reactive. Less hungry. Less interested in noise. That simplicity is not emptiness. It is coherence beginning to settle into form. Something subtle happens when coherence begins to stabilize. The pressure that once governed your decisions starts to dissolve. You still move, you still act, you still choose, but the internal sense of being chased by time weakens. Urgency no longer drives you. Deadlines lose their emotional charge. The future stops looming like a threat that must be managed. This is not because time disappears, but because psychological time does. Psychological time is the constant projection of yourself into a future that needs fixing or a past that needs correcting. It is the habit of believing that fulfillment exists somewhere other than now. When identity stabilizes, this habit loosens. You begin to inhabit the present not as a concept, but as a lived state. Creation has always happened in the present moment. Not as a spiritual slogan, but as a structural fact. Action taken from anxiety fractures energy. Action taken from alignment concentrates it. When you stop rushing, your movements become exact. You show up when something is ready to move, not when fear demands motion. This is why it can look, from the outside, like you are doing less while achieving more. Hustle dissolves because it is no longer necessary. Hustle is a compensation strategy for internal misalignment. It tries to outrun doubt with speed and overwhelm uncertainty with effort. Precision, on the other hand, emerges naturally when the inner signal is clear. You wait not out of indecision, but out of attunement. Then, when you move, the movement lands. As urgency fades, something unexpected happens. Time appears to bend. Opportunities align without strain. Conversations happen at the right moment. Resources arrive when they can be used effectively. This is not because you have learned to manipulate reality, but because there is no longer internal static distorting the signal you are sending. Coherence creates efficiency without force. You also notice a shift in how you relate to waiting. Waiting no longer feels like stagnation or failure. It feels active, even fertile. Silence becomes a form of preparation. Stillness becomes intelligent. You are no longer trying to fill every gap with motion. You allow the next step to reveal itself instead of demanding it appear. This state can be unsettling at first, especially in a culture that equates speed with worth. Slowing down may trigger old fears of falling behind or missing out. But as you stay with it, you realize something important. Nothing aligned ever passes you by. What is meant to meet you requires your presence, not your panic. Living outside psychological time does not make you passive. It makes you exact. You say yes when the signal is clean. You say no without guilt when it is not. You stop mistaking pressure for importance. The body relaxes. The nervous system settles. Decisions become simpler because they are no longer filtered through fear of delay. This is one of the clearest indicators that identity is no longer anchored in survival. When time stops controlling you, life begins responding to you. Not because you are ahead of it, but because you are finally with it. Like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. At a certain point, the need for clean answers begins to dissolve. Not because you stop caring about truth, but because you stop forcing it into shapes that make the mind feel safe. This is one of the clearest signs of spiritual maturity. You realize that reality does not operate in binaries, and neither do you. Something can hurt deeply and still be right. Something can feel heavy and still be sacred. Earlier stages of growth crave resolution. They want certainty, definitions, conclusions. Is this good or bad? Right or wrong? Progress or failure? But as coherence deepens, you begin to sense that truth is layered, multidimensional. It does not collapse into a single interpretation without losing its depth. When you stop demanding answers, understanding actually expands. You start to notice that grief and gratitude can occupy the same space without canceling each other out. You can mourn what was lost while honoring what it gave you. You can feel pain without needing to label it as a mistake. This is not confusion. It is capacity. The capacity to let experience be whole rather than edited for comfort. The same is true with power and surrender. At lower levels of identity, these appear to be opposites. Either you are in control or you are letting go. Either you are strong or you are yielding. But at higher coherence, this division collapses. True power does not resist surrender. It flows through it. Surrender is no longer giving up. It is aligning with what is already moving. Binary thinking dissolves because it is no longer useful. It was a scaffold, not a destination. It helped you make sense of the world when your nervous system needed clarity to feel safe. But once safety is internalized, the scaffolding can come down. You no longer need to reduce reality to manageable pieces. You can hold it as it is. This is often where others begin to misunderstand you. People who rely on certainty may find your presence unsettling. You no longer offer quick answers or clean narratives. You speak from nuance. You allow silence. You refuse to flatten complexity for the sake of agreement. This is not arrogance. It is respect for truth. Holding paradox does not mean you stop choosing. It means your choices are no longer reactions against one side of a false divide. You can act decisively without demonizing alternatives. You can commit fully without needing to prove that every other path is wrong. This creates a grounded confidence that does not need to dominate or convince. You may notice that emotional experiences move differently now. They arise, they inform, and they pass. Not because you control them, but because you do not cling to them. There is room. Space. Awareness wide enough to contain opposing sensations without fragmenting identity. This is what allows wisdom to emerge naturally, without effort. When you stop demanding answers, life begins offering insight. When you stop forcing resolution, meaning reveals itself over time. Paradox is not something to solve. It is something to live inside of without resistance. If this capacity is stirring in you, it is not accidental. It is a sign that your system can now hold more truth than it could before. Comment with the words, "I am ready," to anchor this timeline. At some point, emotion stops being something that drags you and starts becoming something you witness. This is not suppression, and it is not detachment. It is a reorganization of relationship. Instead of being inside every reaction, you are now aware of the space in which reactions arise. That space is you. Triggers still appear. Sensations still move through the body. Heat, tightening, agitation, sadness, even anger can still surface. The difference is that these signals no longer seize control of identity. You feel them without becoming them. The moment of choice widens. Where there was once an automatic reaction, there is now a pause. In that pause, coherence lives. Observation replaces identification quietly. You do not announce it. You may not even notice it at first. You simply find yourself less compelled to defend, explain, or strike back. The urge arises, but it no longer dictates action. You see it, feel it, and allow it to pass through without assigning it authority. This is not discipline. It is clarity. Because you are no longer fused with every emotional wave, energy stops leaking. Reactions are expensive. They scatter attention and drain presence. Response, on the other hand, is efficient. It emerges from alignment rather than impulse. When you respond, it is because something true needs to be expressed, not because something inside you needs relief. This is why your words begin to change. You speak less, but when you do, what you say carries weight. There is no excess explanation, no emotional charge attached to being understood. Words arrive clean. They land clean. Sometimes a single sentence does what an argument never could. Sometimes silence does the work entirely. You also begin to notice that drama loses its gravitational pull. Situations that once consumed your attention now pass without sticking. Not because you are indifferent, but because you are no longer feeding them with identification. Without resistance or engagement, many conflicts dissolve on their own. Energy follows attention. When attention is steady, chaos starves. This shift often confuses others. People who are used to emotional escalation may interpret your calm as distance, coldness, or superiority. It is none of these. It is containment. You are no longer outsourcing your center to external conditions. You carry it with you. This makes you unpredictable in the best way. You cannot be easily provoked, manipulated, or pulled into cycles that do not align. Responding instead of reacting also deepens compassion. When you are not hijacked by your own emotions, you can actually perceive what is happening in others. You hear what is being said beneath the words. You feel the fear beneath the anger, the grief beneath the control. This does not mean you tolerate distortion. It means you are no longer threatened by it. There is a quiet authority that emerges here. Not dominance. Not passivity. Presence. People feel it without being able to name it. They sense that you are not available for games, but you are available for truth. That distinction matters. This is one of the clearest energetic signs that coherence has moved from concept into embodiment. When reaction loses its grip, response becomes natural. And when response is natural, reality begins meeting you differently. Not louder. Clearer. You have already experienced death, even if no one ever named it that way. Not the kind that stops the body, but the kind that dismantles who you thought you were. The kind that leaves nothing familiar to stand on. These moments often arrive disguised as breakdowns, losses, failures, or endings that feel unfair in their timing or intensity. But they were not random, and they were not mistakes. They were transitions. Each symbolic death collapses an identity that can no longer carry your frequency. A role outgrows you. A relationship completes itself. A belief structure cracks under the weight of truth. When this happens, the nervous system panics because it interprets identity loss as annihilation. But something deeper knows better. What is dissolving is not you. It is what you were using to define yourself. This is why these moments feel so total. When identity collapses, there is nothing to grab onto. No future to plan. No past to reference. Just emptiness. The mind calls this the void. It tries to escape it, fix it, or distract from it. But the ones who move through this path do something different. They stay. They feel. They allow the dismantling to complete. Breakdowns are intelligent. They are not punishments or signs of weakness. They are reconfigurations. When a structure can no longer hold the current running through it, it must come apart so something truer can form. Resistance prolongs the pain. Surrender shortens it. Not because surrender makes it pleasant, but because it allows the transition to finish. Grief is the companion of these deaths, and grief is widely misunderstood. It is often treated as something to overcome, suppress, or heal from as quickly as possible. But grief is not pathology. Grief is love completing itself. It is the process by which attachment releases its grip with dignity. When you allow grief fully, without rushing it or judging it, it does its work cleanly. Each time you move through one of these deaths without abandoning yourself, something stabilizes. You come back simpler. Less attached. Less afraid of endings. You stop mistaking permanence for safety. You begin to trust transitions instead of resisting them. This is why death loses its psychological power over you. You have already survived the worst part, the loss of who you thought you had to be. People who have not experienced this kind of death often fear change intensely. They cling to identities, roles, and relationships long after they have expired. Those who have walked through multiple collapses move differently. They know that endings are not erasure. They are refinement. Each death burns away what is no longer coherent, leaving density, presence, and clarity behind. This is also why fear lessens. Not because nothing can hurt you anymore, but because you know pain does not destroy what is real. What survives these deaths is not an idea of self. It is essence. Something quieter and more stable than personality. Something that does not need protection because it cannot be lost. If you recognize this pattern in your own life, understand this clearly. You were not breaking down. You were being recalibrated. You were not abandoned. You were being released. And you did not lose yourself. You shed what could not come with you. Once you have died like this more than once, endings stop feeling like enemies. They feel like doorways. As your frequency stabilizes, something unexpected begins to happen in your interactions. Without trying to, without changing your behavior, you start to affect the emotional climate around you. Conversations shift when you enter a room. People respond more strongly than they used to. Some become unusually open. Others grow tense, defensive, or distant. This is not a personality issue. It is an energetic one. When coherence deepens, distortion becomes more visible. Your presence functions like a mirror, not because you are judging or analyzing anyone, but because clarity exposes contrast automatically. What is unresolved in others rises to the surface in your field. This can feel uncomfortable to those who are accustomed to hiding from themselves. Not because you are doing anything to them, but because something in them feels seen. This is where projection enters. When people feel exposed without consent, the mind looks for a cause. It assigns meaning. You become labeled as intimidating, cold, intense, or distant. In reality, you are simply not participating in the same level of unconscious exchange. You are not reinforcing masks. You are not colluding with denial. Your neutrality reads as threat to patterns that rely on emotional reinforcement to survive. At the same time, others experience the opposite. They find themselves telling you things they never intended to share. They open up suddenly. They speak truths they have been holding back. This is often surprising to both of you. Your presence feels safe because it is clean. There is no agenda, no extraction, no need to fix or respond. Honesty emerges naturally in a field where nothing is being manipulated. This creates a polarity in social response. Some lean in. Some pull away. Neither reaction is about you personally. Both are responses to resonance. Resonance is alignment. Rejection is misalignment. They feel similar on the surface but are structurally different. Rejection carries hostility or judgment. Misalignment simply cannot sustain proximity without friction. The mistake many people make at this stage is assuming responsibility for others' discomfort. They soften themselves, explain more, dim their clarity, or retreat entirely. This is an attempt to manage external reactions by distorting internal truth. It never works. Guilt is not a solution. It is a signal that identity is still trying to negotiate acceptance. You are not here to be comfortable to everyone. You are here to be coherent. When coherence is present, the field self-organizes. Those who are ready find you without effort. Those who are not drift away without explanation. This is not loss. It is sorting. It allows energy to flow where it can actually be received. It is important to understand that making others uncomfortable does not mean you are doing something wrong. Discomfort is often the first response to truth when avoidance has been the norm. It is the sensation of contrast entering awareness. What others choose to do with that sensation is not yours to manage. As this becomes clear, social friction stops feeling personal. You no longer take responsibility for reactions that are not yours. Compassion remains, but self-betrayal leaves. You stay present without shrinking. You allow honesty without forcing it. You let alignment do the work that explanation never could. When guilt dissolves, something else stabilizes. Trust. Trust that resonance is intelligent. Trust that clarity does not need to apologize. Trust that the right connections do not require effort to maintain. And trust that your presence, exactly as it is not the problem. It is the filter. As coherence stabilizes, protection becomes essential. Not protection from the world, but protection of your internal signal. You begin to notice that your energy no longer tolerates what it once absorbed without complaint. Conversations linger in the body longer. Environments leave residue. Media affects your nervous system immediately. This increased sensitivity is not weakness. It is refinement. At this stage, discernment sharpens naturally. You stop treating everything as neutral. You see clearly that every input carries information and every interaction leaves an imprint. Thoughts are no longer just thoughts. They are instructions. Media is no longer entertainment alone. It is programming. Environments are no longer backgrounds. They are fields that either support coherence or erode it. This is where energetic hygiene becomes non-negotiable. Not as a spiritual rule, but as a biological necessity. You become deliberate about what you consume mentally, emotionally, and physically. You notice which conversations drain you and which stabilize you. You feel immediately when something is off. The body reacts before the mind forms an opinion. The body becomes a truth compass. Tightness, fatigue, agitation, or dullness are no longer ignored or overridden. These sensations are feedback. They tell you when something is misaligned long before logic can justify it. You stop pushing through discomfort for the sake of convenience, politeness, or habit. You listen and you adjust. This ruthlessness is often misunderstood. From the outside, it can look cold or restrictive. In reality, it is reverence. You are no longer willing to pollute a refined signal with unnecessary noise. This does not mean isolating yourself or becoming rigid. It means choosing quality over quantity. Precision over tolerance. You may find yourself disengaging from certain media without effort. The content that once felt stimulating now feels chaotic or hollow. Endless scrolling loses appeal. Gossip feels abrasive. Performative outrage feels exhausting. This is not moral superiority. It is nervous system alignment. Your system simply no longer resonates with distortion. The same applies to internal dialogue. You become aware of the energetic cost of certain thought patterns. Replaying old narratives, rehearsing conflict, or indulging in self-doubt now registers as static. You do not fight these thoughts. You do not suppress them. You simply stop feeding them with attention. Energy follows focus. What you starve dissolves. Environments also begin to matter more. You notice how certain spaces calm you while others agitate you. Lighting, sound, clutter, and even architecture affect your state. You instinctively move toward simplicity. Clean lines. Silence. Order. Not for aesthetic reasons, but because coherence thrives in environments that do not fragment attention. This level of care is what allows omega frequency to remain embodied. Without it, coherence leaks. With it, stability deepens. You are no longer trying to be high-functioning in misaligned conditions. You are designing your life around resonance rather than endurance. Ruthlessness with energy is not about control. It is about alignment. You are not shrinking your world. You are refining it. And as you do, something remarkable happens. The less you tolerate distortion, the less of it appears. Reality begins matching your standards not because you demand it, but because your frequency no longer invites anything else. At this stage, solitude stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like alignment. It is no longer something you fall into when connection fails. It becomes something you choose because your system requires it to stay coherent. This is not withdrawal from life. It is calibration with it. Silence becomes regenerative. Not because you are escaping stimulation, but because you are returning to signal. When the noise quiets, your frequency recalibrates naturally. Thoughts slow. The nervous system settles. What felt scattered begins to organize itself without effort. Solitude is not empty space. It is active space. It is where coherence repairs itself. This is why omega-level individuals are not antisocial. They are selectively solitary. You may still enjoy connection, collaboration, and intimacy, but you no longer treat constant interaction as healthy by default. You recognize that too much external input fractures attention. It pulls you outward until you begin leaking energy. Solitude plugs those leaks. In silence, something important happens. You stop responding to the world long enough to hear yourself. Not the surface noise of thought, but the deeper current underneath it. This is where guidance clarifies. Not as commands or plans, but as a felt sense of what is true and what is not. Solitude restores your internal reference point. This restoration is what makes solitude magnetizing rather than isolating. When you are rooted in yourself, you stop reaching outward for validation, stimulation, or reassurance. You are no longer hungry. This fullness is palpable. Others feel it when you re-enter shared space. Presence deepens. Words land more cleanly. Attention becomes focused. Loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness comes from disconnection from self. Solitude comes from intimacy with self. One drains. The other replenishes. When solitude is structural, loneliness fades, even if you spend more time alone than before. You are accompanied by your own coherence. Selective solitude becomes non-negotiable at this level. Not because you are rigid, but because you have learned the cost of neglecting it. Without regular recalibration, sensitivity turns into overwhelm. Clarity blurs. Reaction creeps back in. Solitude prevents this by resetting the system before distortion accumulates. You may notice that your tolerance for noise decreases. Loud environments, constant conversation, or perpetual stimulation begin to feel abrasive. This is not intolerance. It is discernment. Your system is tuned finely now. It cannot stay clean in chaotic conditions indefinitely. So you choose when and how you engage. Solitude also dissolves urgency. Time slows. Presence expands. You remember that you are not required to respond to everything immediately. Space returns between stimulus and response. In that space, wisdom lives. This is where much of your stabilization happens quietly, without ceremony. No one may ever see this part of your life. That is precisely why it works. Solitude does not perform. It repairs. When solitude is honored as structure rather than symptom, coherence deepens effortlessly. You do not need to retreat from the world to do this. You simply need to stop abandoning yourself within it. Once coherence stabilizes, it cannot remain static. Frequency that is held but not expressed begins to distort. This is not a moral rule or a creative preference. It is a structural reality. Energy wants to move. When it does not, pressure builds. Suppression creates friction. Expression restores flow. At this level, expression is no longer about being seen, heard, or validated. Those motivations belong to earlier stages. Omega frequency does not express to perform. It expresses to transmit. There is a difference. Performance is outward-facing and approval-oriented. Transmission is inwardly sourced and consequence-neutral. One tries to create impact. The other simply allows truth to move through form. This is why expression becomes inevitable rather than optional. You may feel a growing discomfort when you hold back what is true. Not because you are trying to be authentic, but because withholding coherence creates internal resistance. Silence that is aligned feels clean. Silence that is suppressive feels heavy. You begin to sense the difference immediately. Expression does not require volume. It does not require platforms, audiences, or constant output. It requires honesty in movement. Sometimes truth moves through voice. Sometimes through creation. Sometimes through the way you show up in ordinary moments. Sometimes through what you refuse to participate in. Presence itself becomes expressive when it is undiluted. When expression is aligned, it carries authority without force. You do not need to convince. You do not need to argue. You do not need to explain more than is necessary. Words land because they are coherent, not because they are persuasive. Creation resonates because it is clean, not because it is impressive. Suppression, on the other hand, destabilizes frequency quickly. You may notice irritability, fatigue, restlessness, or a sense of dullness when you consistently withhold what wants to move. This is not emotional immaturity. It is energetic congestion. The system knows when it is blocking itself. This is also where fear can reappear briefly. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of disruption. Fear of consequence. But at this level, fear is informational, not directive. It shows you where old identities still want control. You feel it, acknowledge it, and move anyway when truth calls. Not recklessly. Precisely. Expression does not mean saying everything to everyone. Discernment remains intact. You know when to speak and when silence is more accurate. You know where your frequency can land and where it cannot. Expression follows resonance, not impulse. It moves through channels that can actually receive it. As you allow this, something stabilizes further. The more freely your frequency moves, the less it destabilizes internally. Flow reinforces coherence. Coherence amplifies clarity. The cycle feeds itself. You stop leaking energy through suppression and stop scattering it through performance. This is how embodiment completes itself. Not by retreating inward permanently, and not by projecting outward indiscriminately, but by allowing what you are to move naturally into the world. No forcing. No hiding. No inflation. When frequency is expressed cleanly, it does not exhaust you. It nourishes you. It grounds you. It confirms alignment without needing feedback. You are no longer holding your truth inside like something fragile. You are letting it breathe. At this stage, expression is no longer a choice. It is a function of coherence. When identity stabilizes, the external world begins responding differently. Not dramatically at first, and not in ways that satisfy the old desire for proof. The shift is subtle, almost quiet. You notice that you are no longer forcing outcomes the way you used to. Things meet you instead of needing to be chased. Conversations open doors. Decisions remove obstacles rather than creating new ones. Life feels less adversarial. This is not because you have learned how to manifest more effectively. It is because you are no longer creating from fragmentation. When inner state and outer action align, effort stops compensating for misalignment. Energy moves cleanly. Reality responds not to what you want, but to what you are consistently broadcasting. Synchronicity replaces strain. You think of someone and they reach out. You arrive at the right place without planning it. Opportunities surface at the moment they can actually be received. These are not rewards. They are reflections. When coherence is present, the field organizes itself with efficiency. There is less friction because there is less internal contradiction. This is where many misunderstand manifestation. They imagine it as a technique, a visualization practice, or a mental exercise. But manifestation is not a function of thought. It is a function of availability. When identity is unstable, desire is loud because it is compensating. When identity is stable, availability is quiet because it is sufficient. You are open without grasping. Timeline selection happens through being, not wanting. At every moment, countless versions of reality are available. Which one you experience depends on your internal state. When your frequency changes, the version of reality that matches it comes into focus automatically. You do not jump timelines. You align with the one you are already compatible with. This is why effort falls away. Effort is required when you are trying to force alignment from the outside. When alignment exists internally, action becomes cooperative rather than coercive. You are no longer pushing against life. You are moving with it. Resistance dissolves not because life complies, but because you are no longer fighting what is present. You may notice that problems resolve themselves before you intervene. Situations that once demanded control now reorganize naturally. This does not mean you become passive. It means your actions are timed. You move when movement is effective. You wait when waiting is wise. Precision replaces urgency. Availability also changes how you relate to uncertainty. You stop needing guarantees. You trust that clarity will arrive when it is useful, not when anxiety demands it. This trust is not blind faith. It is experiential. You have seen enough evidence of coherence working that you no longer panic when the next step is not immediately visible. Reality meeting you halfway does not mean life becomes perfect. It means it becomes responsive. Feedback loops shorten. Lessons integrate faster. Course corrections require less damage. You are no longer learning through collapse. You are learning through resonance. This is the natural outcome of embodiment. Not control over reality, but partnership with it. When who you are and how you live stop sending mixed signals, the world has no confusion to reflect back to you. You did not make this happen. You became available to it. At a certain point, the desire to be seen dissolves completely. Not because you are suppressing it, and not because you have convinced yourself that recognition is bad, but because it no longer makes sense. The internal question shifts from, will this be noticed, to, is this true? And once that shift happens, visibility loses its leverage over you. Earlier stages often confuse impact with acknowledgement. They assume that influence requires audience, that worth requires witness, that meaning must be recorded or remembered. But as coherence deepens, this equation collapses. You begin to feel, directly and unmistakably, that your state matters more than your story. That your presence does more than your performance ever could. Recognition is an external echo. It arrives late, distorted, and often inaccurately. Vibration, on the other hand, is immediate. It moves through the field regardless of who names it. When you stabilize at this level, you no longer measure your life by milestones, applause, or legacy. You feel the quiet certainty that every aligned moment registers somewhere deeper than memory. This is where ego dissolves not through rejection, but through irrelevance. You are not fighting the desire to be known. You simply outgrow it. It no longer organizes your decisions. You no longer choose actions based on how they will be received, remembered, or interpreted. You choose based on coherence alone. And because of that, your actions land more cleanly, even when no one is watching. Impact becomes silent and cumulative. A conversation shifts someone internally without you ever knowing. A choice made from integrity alters a trajectory you will never see. A moment of restraint prevents a pattern from repeating downstream. None of this is recorded. None of it needs to be. You feel it in your body as alignment, not as pride. Legacy thinking dissolves here. Legacy is a future-facing attempt to stabilize worth. It assumes value must persist after you are gone to matter now. But at this level, you recognize something more precise. Presence is immediate impact. Every coherent breath, every unreactive response, every refusal to distort truth sends a ripple through the field. You do not need to outlive yourself to matter. This is also where peace deepens. When recognition is no longer the currency, comparison ends. You stop tracking where you stand relative to others. You stop wondering if you are ahead, behind, overlooked, or underestimated. Those measurements require an external scoreboard. You no longer play on one. You may still be visible at times. You may still be heard, acknowledged, or credited. But these become incidental rather than necessary. They do not inflate you, and their absence does not diminish you. Worth is no longer negotiated. It is embodied. This is one of the clearest signs that identity has fully stabilized. You are no longer orienting toward the world for confirmation. You are oriented within yourself, and from there, you act. Quietly. Precisely. Without needing the world to agree. When recognition dissolves, something more durable takes its place. Trust. Trust that coherence registers even when it is unseen. Trust that alignment is never wasted. Trust that what moves through you leaves an imprint whether or not your name is attached to it. At this level, you are not building a legacy. You are participating in the field. And that participation is enough. At some point, the search ends without fanfare. Not because you have arrived at a destination, but because you realize there was never anything to arrive at. The question you were asking dissolves. The signal you were waiting for is no longer external. It is no longer something you scan for, interpret, or seek confirmation of. It is what you are. This is the quiet resolution of the entire arc. Not ascent, not achievement, not transcendence, but remembrance. You remember that consciousness was never separate from what it was looking for. The sense of being a seeker collapses because the one who is seeking recognizes itself as the source. Nothing new is added. Nothing is upgraded. What changes is orientation. Earlier, you looked outward for alignment. You searched for signs, teachings, validations, and mirrors that could tell you who you were becoming. Those reflections served their purpose. They guided attention inward. But once identity stabilizes, attention no longer needs external cues to orient itself. Presence becomes self-referencing. You are no longer watching for shifts. You are inhabiting them. You are no longer waiting for permission, clarity, or certainty to arrive. Action arises naturally from coherence. Stillness is no longer a pause between movements. It is the ground from which movement emerges. Everything happens from here, in the present moment, without commentary. This is not a peak state. It is not dramatic. It is ordinary in the deepest sense. You pay attention. You respond when needed. You rest when rest is true. You speak when words are clean. You remain silent when silence is accurate. Nothing about this needs explanation. It functions because it is aligned, not because it is understood. The idea of becoming something dissolves here. Becoming implies lack. It implies a future state that will finally complete you. That narrative loses relevance. There is nothing missing that needs to be acquired through effort. What remains is refinement, not pursuit. Presence, not progress. This is also where anxiety about direction fades. You no longer ask whether you are on the right path. The path is not ahead of you. It is expressed through you, step by step, moment by moment. You do not need to see far. You only need to stay coherent now. The next movement reveals itself from within that coherence. Nothing external needs to change for this to be true. Circumstances may continue to evolve. Challenges may still appear. But the relationship to them is different. You are no longer orienting around survival, validation, or outcome. You are orienting around alignment. That single shift reorganizes everything else without force. When you are the signal, you do not broadcast intentionally. You simply exist. And that existence registers. In rooms. In conversations. In choices. In moments no one else will ever witness. The field responds not because you demand it, but because coherence is readable. There is nothing left to seek after this. Only something to live. Not perfectly. Not impressively. Honestly. Presently. Fully. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it.